In this section, we're going to talk about biodiversity and conservation. So it starts here with a great question. What happens to this ecosystem if this river gets destroyed? There's some really cool YouTube videos on things like what happened when wolves were restored to Yellowstone. Watch something like that. It's kind of interesting because restoring an ecosystem or restoring even one species to an ecosystem can have a huge effect on the rest of the ecosystem. So I want to go down and show you some of the reasons why it's important to protect biodiversity. So, one reason that biodiversity is so important is that a lot of animals and plants right now are going extinct. We're actually experiencing a mass extinction of biodiversity as we lose, especially habitat loss. Habitat loss, losing parts, places for these animals and plants to live, is the number one threat to biodiversity loss. So, we're currently experiencing a lot of extinction. Extinction means um, basically there's going to be something has fully died and it's not going to be able to come back. And extinction for us means that there's less variety, there's less food sources in the ecosystem. You've now changed the food web, and so there's less things for other organisms to eat or that eats them. And then there's also less beauty and intrinsic values. So there's a lot of problems to losing that biodiversity. And biodiversity is the variety of life that lives in a specific area. So it's how many different species live in that area. Genetic diversity is literally all the genes that are found in a certain area. So all the genes from any plant and animal and that's found in a certain space is the genetic diversity. So this is just a diverse set of what we call ladybugs, but they're Asian beetles. There's obviously a lot of diversity here, and you can imagine why. There's going to be different ones that eat different things, that live in different habitats, and so they need to look different in order to survive. Here's a great picture, probably in Africa, and you can see a lot of diversity there. So, biodiversity, having diversity in biology, in different ecosystems and in organisms, basically increases the chance that some organisms will survive if something happens. So, if a disease goes through a population, having them be diverse and different from each other helps make it so that some might survive even though some die. And then species diversity is basically the amount of different species, individual species that you have in an area. And I'm glad they picked the giraffe. If we have a chance, we'll talk about it later. They used to think that most giraffes were all one species. And when they threw a few together in one place, like a zoo or something, and they had different patterns, they didn't really notice that there were differences in the giraffe coats, and they would breed and hang out. But then somebody started to notice, it was actually San Diego Zoo Global that started noticing the differences in coats. And then they did genetic testing and found that all these giraffes were actually genetically distinct, like subspecies of each other, where they could breed, but then when you ended up sorting them out, they actually would sort each other by coat. They knew that they were genetically different from one another. So here's a great picture. I love this graph or this illustration. It's got the distribution of bird species in across like North America, and you can see that there's not very many up here in the really frozen cold parts. But what about here down in Florida? Florida's, sitting in the maybe 100 different bird type range, it's like warm, humid. There should be a lot more. There's just not that many. And then we have some more as we get closer to the equator, which you would expect. And we're doing okay down here in Southern California, but you would probably expect a lot darker green down here in the United States for ecosystem diversity. So ecosystem diversity is all the different populations that are interacting with each other. I love puffins. I think they're just such a cute little bird. Anyways, so here's some puffins in the Arctic. Here's a rainforest in South America. It's just trying to show you the difference between the two. Okay, so I'm going to leave it on that pretty picture and talk to you about the importance of biodiversity. So there's some direct economic value of biodiversity. Direct economic means it directly makes us money, or you can see the profit, or you can attach some dollar signs to that and say, here is the value of that. So this would be something like a spring of water in the middle of the desert. You know right away that has value to the people there. You could say this is a crop of some sort that somebody has grown and they're going to sell that crop. So there's some value, immediate value, in having some kind of different, say, plants in, that people have grown, or animals that you can hunt, or if a lake is very rich in fish. All of those different types of diversity have a direct economic value. Right away, you can see the dollar signs. So I'm going to tell you 5 different ways that that things have a direct economic value to us. So one of them would be they make food for us. If something makes food for us, we know it's valuable. If they make medicine for us, if something is worth or can be cure a human or some other problem, then that has a value to us. If it's shelter, can make shelter or building materials, clothing, or even ecotourism, to go through places, have a direct economic value. So, and in so that's talking about the health connection. This is an interesting, beautiful flower. We have something similar here called vinca, but this actually isn't vinca. This is periwinkle from Madagascar, and this flower that just kind of grows on the forest floor there. And we have actually gotten rid of some of the forest there. This flower actually cures some types of leukemia, which is a bone cancer. So I'm really glad that we still have that flower to help humans with that. Indirect economic value, I'm trying to find the title for that. Okay. An indirect economic value is a value that we maybe don't see or understand right away. Eventually, we realize, oh, that was helpful. We should have kept it. So, for example, I do remember a professor that I had that had worked in the rainforest, and they brought back a plant. They thought that it maybe could be helpful in curing cancer. They had done some preliminary testing. They went back to the Polynesian Islands to get more. A storm had wiped out that part of the forest, and they couldn't find that plant anymore at all. So that is an indirect economic value. We're not sure right away, but eventually we see that it was important. Here is a great example of that. In New York, they had a watershed that helped clean out their drinking water. So they're just where they got their drinking water. But over time, this watershed got highly polluted. And so their drinking water was no longer healthy or safe. So the city actually looked at, what can we do financially about this? Well, they could either build a plant that filtered the water, and that would cost $6 billion, or they could spend $1.5 billion cleaning up the waterways, and the water would be safe enough to be filtered in an easy way. Well, clearly $6 billion versus $1.5 billion, it's a lot cheaper to just clean up the waterway. So that's what they decided to do. There's a ton of stories like this where things happened later and we realized that, that was way too costly and we need to go backwards. And sometimes you can go backwards and sometimes you can't. Um, Aesthetic value is another really important, and this is beautiful Lake Tahoe. It is so gorgeous. But Lake Tahoe over time has actually gotten quite polluted, and there's a lot of efforts to clean it up. Now, Lake Tahoe maybe doesn't have a ton of, it's got some tourism, but it doesn't have a lot of other economic value. But it has value just because of what's called aesthetics. Aesthetic, aesthetics, meaning we want to save it just because it's beautiful. We want to preserve it just because it's beautiful. And over time, invasive animals have been added. Like people have actually released tons of their goldfish. I don't know if any of you guys have ever released a plant or an animal out in nature, but have done that. Even the goldfish released by people have done a lot of damage and eaten like the natural fish in that area. Additionally, different mussels and things that attach to boats have gotten slowly added into Lake Tahoe, and it's actually polluted it and disrupted the ecosystem. So I want to show you an ecosystem I got to visit. This was Mungala in Australia. Mungala, this is me replanting trees in near the Great Barrier Reef. Now, the Aborigine people, that's like their Native American population. They actually had a large number of their wetlands, and wetlands actually clean out more pollutants than any other ecosystem. They had a lot of their wetlands drained. Well, this was hundreds of years ago when other people came in. And the native peoples, the Aborigine people, lost their lands, and they just built like sugarcane fields there and drained all these wetlands. Well, since it cleans out more pollutants than any other place, the local farming and stuff, all those pollutants were going down into the Great Barrier Reef, and has really contributed to one of the reasons why the Great Barrier Reef is dying. And so recently, like in the last 10 to 15 years, these Aborigine people have purchased those sugarcane fields, which you can see some in the background, but they've purchased a lot of it, torn out the sugarcane, and they've started to rebuild the wetlands. And their story is amazing. They actually built they dug all these free form trenches so that it could fill up with ocean water, but they couldn't have the ocean water seeping in. So they built a big giant like a wall of sand, so that the ocean couldn't come in while they dug all of this. And then they waited till the largest tide of the year, and they brought out all these people and had all these dances and celebrations and moved the sand, and they were hoping that the water would come in from the ocean and flood it, and it did not. And they were really bummed. And what they didn't know is that it would take so much water just to fill the underground areas underneath the wetlands. And so the second day of their celebration, which was the second highest tide of the year, it actually did come in and flood all their wetlands, which is what they wanted. And now their wetlands, we went and planted, you can see in this picture, I think I call it 39 trees. You can see these tiny little baby native trees that we're planting there. And they've been planting native trees every year for so many years. And now their wetland is gorgeous. Look at all these native birds are coming in. They've had all these different, look at this. Look how gorgeous their wetlands are. And now it's filtering out. They've won all kinds of awards. It's filtering out all kinds of pollutants before it gets to the Great Barrier Reef. And this is one of the people that we got to work with. He was awesome. And oh, there's me. I'm on their website. I didn't know that. And some of my researcher friends. But look how gorgeous this is. Look how beautiful what they've done to restore that. And it's not only helping that wetland, but it's helping the Great Barrier Reef. So some things can be restored. At any rate, these are some of the pictures. I hope you guys, um, you know, love biodiversity as much as I do, and think about what you can do to help maintain biodiversity on our beautiful planet. Have a great day.